This 5-color deck is a big mana spell slinger build. We want to achieve victory by casting powerful and impactful instant and sorcery spells well ahead of curve, as well as reaping additional peripheral benefits from doing so. The majority of the spells in this deck are multicolored. This helps to trigger our general's ability as frequently as possible, which allows us to access and utilize oodles of colored mana to continue casting our game-resonating spells. We win the game either peripherally through our spellcasting value engine or through combat. Ramos Dragon Engine debuted as a secondary commander option in the Draconic Domination pre-constructed EDH deck from the 2017 Commander product. Ramos is a 4/4 dragon artifact creature with flying for 6 generic mana. Whenever we cast a spell, we put a +1/+1 counter on Ramos for each of that spell's colors. We can remove 5 +1/+1 counters from Ramos to add 2 white, 2 blue, 2 black, 2 red, and 2 green mana to our mana pool. This is an ability that we can activate only once each turn. This spellcasting engine nearly revs itself. We cast spells that put +1/+1 counters onto Ramos. We remove these counters for double Wooburg mana. We use this mana to cast more spells that put more +1/+1 counters onto Ramos. Although Ramos's mana-producing ability is limited, note that this restriction states once each turn. It does not say once during our turn. We have the potential to utilize our general's mana-producing ability during our opponent's turns as well. When this nearly limitless spellcasting engine is paired with any of our peripheral spell-slinging payoffs, it will only be a matter of time before we hear a round of good games from our opponents. The early turns of the game are vital for mana ramping and color fixing, especially with this type of build. We have numerous multicolored spells inundating the 99 of this deck, and we do not want a lack of appropriately colored mana acting as a barrier to our game plan. With that in mind, we begin the 99 of this deck tech with our Singleton land base, which includes 1 basic land of each color. It may be tempting to craft an entire land base of non-basic lands, but that is a mistake. We do not want to lose out on any peripheral land ramping benefits tied to cards like Assassin's Trophy, Path to Exile, Veteran Explorer, or Field of Ruin. We will resist this temptation, and our reward will come in the form of extra lands on the battlefield. We have the 10 shock lands. These lands enter the battlefield tapped unless we pay 2 life, have 2 different land types, and tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana to our mana pool. We have the 5 triomes from Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths. These lands enter the battlefield tapped, have 3 different land types, and tap to add 1 of 3 different colors of mana to our mana pool. As an option, we can cycle these lands away from our hand for 3 generic mana and draw a card. We have the 10 fetch lands as well. We can tap these lands, pay 1 life, and sacrifice them to search our library for a land with 1 of 2 different basic land types and put them onto the battlefield. Note that these fetch lands can put our basic lands, shock lands, and triomes into play from our library. For the purposes of maximizing the effectiveness and efficiency of our color fixing, any early turn fetch lands should put triomes onto the battlefield. Next up is the best land in our format, Command Tower. It will tap to add 1 mana of any color in this build. So does Mana Confluence, but we must pay 1 life each time we activate it. Reflecting Pool should act as another command tower in this deck, while Exotic Orchard should provide 1 of a number of different colors of mana. Cascading Cataracts is indestructible, taps to add 1 colorless mana, or we can pay 5 generic mana, tap it, and add 5 mana in any combination of colors to our mana pool. As we will demonstrate shortly, producing various amounts of colored mana is very important in order to maintain tempo, particularly when piloting a 5-color Spellslinger build like this one. That's 35 of the 37 lands in this deck, and all of them either produce colored mana or provide color-fixing options. There are only 2 non-basic lands in this build that do not follow our color-fixing mantra. Their utility more than makes up for their lack of color-fixing options in this type of deck. Enter Reliquary Tower and Alchemist's Refuge. The tower gives us no maximum hand size, and this benefit cannot be overlooked. We have numerous card-drawing spells and abilities here, and a general that provides oodles of mana to cast them. We do not want to discard down to 7 cards at the end of our turn. Cards in hand equals problems for opponents. More cards in hand equals even more problems for those same opponents. As for Alchemist's Refuge, we can pay a green and a blue mana and tap it to cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Imagine a scenario where we remove 5 +1/+1 counters from Ramos during an opponent's turn. We can use a green mana and a blue mana from among the double Wooburg mana produced to activate Alchemist's Refuge. We still have 8 mana left from Ramos to cast any spell or spells we want. As stated earlier, these 2 lands provide enough utility benefits to warrant their inclusion in this deck. We want to play as fast as we can here. We want to ramp faster than our opponents in order to get Ramos and our spell-slinging engine online as quickly as possible. We have already showcased our diverse mana base, and now it's time to kick it up a notch through the use of various mana-ramping spells. Nature's Lore and 3 Visits allow us to search our library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield. Farseek has us search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card and put it into play tapped. Note that these spells do not require us to search for basic lands. We could search for shock lands and or triomes as long as they have the required land type. It doesn't put lands from our library into play, but Burgeoning can inundate our side of the battlefield with lands, as long as we have them in our hand and our opponents are willing to play along. Whenever an opponent plays a land, we may put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. We have numerous yet-to-be-revealed card-drawing spells and abilities in this deck, so our hand should be loaded with land card options for this enchantment. Witnessing an opponent purposely choose to not play a land in order to not trigger Burgeoning just feels good. It feels really good. Now let's move away from our ramp spells and discuss our mana rocks. We have the usual suspects here in Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Arcane Signet. Mana Crypt and Soul Ring both tap to add 2 colorless mana. Mana Crypt has a coin-flipping upkeep trigger that deals 3 points of damage to us if we lose the flip. Arcane Signet taps to add 1 mana of any color in this build. Remember, Ramos's mana value is generic mana, and an early turn Mana Crypt or Soul Ring can put our general into play way ahead of curve. Next we have Doubling Cube. By itself it does not produce any mana, but we can pay 3 generic mana and tap it to double the amount of each type of mana in our mana pool. Through an activation of Ramos's mana-producing ability, Doubling Cube can turn this 10 mana into a total of 14. Prismatic Geoscope enters the battlefield tapped. Through its domain mechanic, we can tap it and add X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the number of basic land types among lands we control. This artifact should easily tap for any combination of Wooburg mana, particularly when considering the number of lands with multiple land types we have in this deck. To ensure Prismatic Geoscope's maximum mana output, in addition to allaying any other mana-fixing concerns, we have a copy of Prismatic Omen. This enchantment by itself does not produce mana, but it gives lands we control every basic land type in addition to their other types. With Prismatic Omen, our lands tap to add 1 mana of any color, and ensures that Prismatic Geoscope can tap to add its maximum of 5 mana to our mana pool. Our last mana rock is Chromatic Orrery. It allows us to spend mana as though it were mana of any color, which is another instance of fixing our mana. It taps to add 5 colorless mana, which, basically, we can treat as though it were 5 mana in any combination of colors due to the Orrery's static ability. We can pay 5 and tap this mana rock to draw a card for each color among permanents we control, which could max out at 5 cards. Although its mana value is a healthy 7, Chromatic Orrery is a very powerful inclusion for 5-color big mana spell-slinging decks just like this one. The last card in this section of the video is Smothering Tithe. This enchantment provides mana acceleration in the form of treasure tokens, which can be tapped and sacrificed to add 1 mana of any color. We create a treasure token whenever an opponent fails to pay a tax of 2 mana each time they draw a card. More annoyingly to them, they get to hear us incessantly question, "Are you going to pay 2 for that?" Since this deck is a little light on creatures, which is a bit of an understatement as we will demonstrate later, it must be a bit heavier in removal and disruption spells. Aside from our soon-to-be-revealed multicolor Modal spells, most of which provide removal or disruption options, we also have a dedicated suite of spells to help manage the battlefield and keep our life total in the black. Luckily for us, we have Magic's entire suite of removal and disruption spells at our disposal. We begin with some spot removal spells. Assassin's Trophy destroys target permanent an opponent controls. The controller of that permanent may search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Anguished Unmaking exiles target non-land permanent, and we lose 3 life in the process. Void Rend cannot be countered and destroys target non-land permanent. Endless Detour has the owner of target spell, non-land permanent, or card in a graveyard put it on the top or the bottom of their library. Note that these spot removal spells were selected for their versatility as well as for being multicolored. Speaking of being versatile and multicolored, we have Unite the Coalition. It is rife with removal and disruption options. This instant has 5 different modes from which to choose. We choose 5, and we may choose the same mode more than once. Target permanent phases out. Target player draws a card. We exile target player's graveyard. Unite the Coalition deals 2 damage to any target. Or we destroy target artifact or enchantment. Aside from its opponent management options, this spell offers us some protection for Ramos in the form of phasing as well as a card drawing option. Remember, phased out permanents are treated as though they do not exist, and anything attached to those permanents, like auras or equipment, in addition to any counters, remain on that permanent. This means that Ramos's +1/+1 counters remain, even while our general is phased out. Cruel Ultimatum has target opponent sacrifice a creature, discard 3 cards, and lose 5 life. We return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand, draw 3 cards, and we gain 5 life. Although we will most likely whiff on the creature recursion, the 6-card and 10-point life swings, coupled with an opponent's creature hitting the battlefield, should create a chasm-like disparity in resources between us and that one unlucky opponent. Continuing our recent trend of more impactful removal spells, we have Crackling Doom. It deals 2 damage to each opponent, and each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. We have the potential of a 1-for-3ing our opponents with this spell. Note that this forced sacrifice dances around Shroud, Hexproof, Ward, Indestructible, and other forms of protection, and it is a sneaky good way to deal with Voltron commanders. Speaking of Voltron commanders, if we categorize Ramos this way, then Dune Blast may be the perfect battlefield cleanser in this build. We choose up to 1 target creature and then destroy the rest. Note that this spell does not target the chosen creature, so even if our general is protected by Shroud, we can still choose Ramos with Dune Blast. Continuing with the theme of managing our opponent's sides of the battlefield, we have Cyclonic Rift and Ruinous Ultimatum. If we pay Cyclonic Rift's overload cost, then we return each non-land permanent we don't control to their owner's hands. Ruinous Ultimatum can make an even bigger impact as it destroys all non-land permanents our opponents control. Closing out our mass removal spells are Supreme Verdict and Merciless Eviction. Supreme Verdict cannot be countered, and it destroys all creatures. At an affordable mana value of 4, this Wrath effect also destroys our creatures. Merciless Eviction has 4 different modes from which to choose. Either we exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all planeswalkers. Most likely, we will choose to exile all creatures. Remember, this is a spell-slinging deck at heart with very few creature cards in the 99, so our side of the battlefield should be left intact when we cast either of these two board wipes. For some disruption spells, we have Fierce Guardianship and Pact of Negation. Fierce Guardianship is free to cast if we control a commander, and it counters target non-creature spell. Pact of Negation is also free to cast up front, but the hidden mana fee could spell certain doom if we neglect to pay it. For 0 mana, we counter target spell, but at the beginning of our upkeep, we must pay 3 and 2 blue mana, or we lose the game. This is a risky proposition, but one we are prepared to manage. More often than not, these spells are used to protect Ramos, as our opponents will try and try again to remove our general from the battlefield. With our suite of dedicated removal and disruption spells out of the way, now we turn our attention to the bulk of our other Ramos-friendly spells. Let's begin with cards that grant us access to other cards. Inspired Ultimatum has target player gain 5 life, deals 5 points of damage to any target, and has us draw 5 cards. We exile the top 5 cards of our library with Brilliant Ultimatum. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. We may play lands and cast spells from one of those piles, and we may cast spells this way without paying their mana costs. Sphinx's Revelation has us gain X life and draw X cards. Finale of Revelation also has us draw X cards, but if X is 10 or more, instead we shuffle our graveyard into our library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. We then exile Finale of Revelation. Speaking of having no maximum hand size and exiling a spell upon its resolution, Praetor's Council follows suit, except we return all cards from our graveyard to our hand instead of drawing cards from our library. Explosion deals X damage to any target, while target player draws X cards. Expansion copies target instant or sorcery spell with mana value 4 or less. We may choose new targets for the copy. Each side of this split card is relevant here. We can deal direct damage and draw cards, or copy an instant or sorcery spell with a mana value of 4 or less. Ramos approves. The last card in this section is Villainous Wealth. Remember, the cards in this portion of the video grant us access to other cards, which can also mean our opponent's cards as well. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. We may cast any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana costs. With the amount of mana we can generate in this build, casting a profitable and potentially game-ending Villainous Wealth should be easier than Sunday morning. Charms are instant spells in Magic that provide 3 different options from which to choose. There are over 50 charms in Magic, and although this is not a dedicated Lucky Charms type build, we want to include some of the most versatile and powerful charms in the game. How do we pick and choose which charms fit this mold and can be considered worthwhile additions? For the purposes of this build, we followed 2 guidelines. Number 1, we want to put as many +1/+1 counters on Ramos as possible with each spell we cast. So, no monocolored charms. Number 2, each of a charm's modes must be relevant to the thematic scope of this deck. With these criteria in mind, here are the 10 charms in the 99 of this build. Abzan Charm exiles target creature with power 3 or greater, has us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, or distributes 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. Creature removal, card advantage, and the ability to put a total of 5 +1/+1 counters on Ramos in one shot are the reasons why Abzan Charm is in this deck. Bant Charm destroys target artifact, puts target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or counters target instant spell. Artifact and creature removal, in addition to potential protection for our general, are the reasons why Bant Charm is in this build. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player or planeswalker, gives permanents we control indestructible until end of turn, or has target creature gain double strike until end of turn. Potential planeswalker removal, board wipe protection, and double strike enablement on our large and evasive general are the reasons why Boros Charm is in the 99. Broker's Charm has target creature we control get +1/+0 until end of turn, and it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. It destroys target enchantment, or we draw 2 cards. Creature or planeswalker removal, enchantment removal, and card advantage are the reasons why Broker's Charm is in this deck. Croesus' Charm returns target permanents to its owner's hand, destroys target non-black creature, and it cannot be regenerated, or destroys target artifact. Versatile battlefield management is the reason why Croesus' Charm is in this build. Esper Charm destroys target enchantment, draws us 2 cards, or has target player discard 2 cards. Enchantment removal, card advantage, and opponent hand disruption are the reasons why Esper Charm is in the 99. Jund Charm exiles target player's graveyard, deals 2 damage to each creature, or puts 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Graveyard Hate, the potential for mass creature removal, and the ability to put a total of 5 +1/+1 counters on Ramos in one shot are the reasons why Jund Charm is in this deck. Rakdos Charm exiles target player's graveyard, destroys target artifact, or has each creature deal 1 damage to its controller. Graveyard Hate, artifact removal, and potentially dealing lethal direct damage to opponents are the reasons why Rakdos Charm is in this build. Simic Charm gives target creature +3/+3 until end of turn, has permanents we control gain hexproof until end of turn, or returns target creature to its owner's hand. Temporary general buffing, spot removal protection, and bouncing a creature back to its owner's hand are the reasons why Simic Charm is in the 99. Sultai Charm destroys target monocolored creature, destroys target artifact or enchantment, or has us draw 2 cards and then discard a card. Creature removal, artifact or enchantment removal, and card advantage are the reasons why Sultai Charm is in this deck. Although it is not a charm, Kaya's Guile follows suit with the aforementioned charm guidelines and warrants inclusion into this build. Instead of having 3 modes, it has 4, and instead of choosing one of them, we choose 2. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, we exile all opponents' graveyards, we create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, and or we gain 4 life. Admittedly, gaining 4 life is not an overly relevant option, but the other 3 are, and we can choose 2 of them. In addition to putting +1/+1 counters onto our general, we have other ways to reap benefits from casting spells. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, Kaikar Wind's Fury, Shark Typhoon, and Whirlwind of Thought provide a litany of resources. Kaikar creates a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. We also can sacrifice a spirit to add 1 red mana to our mana pool. Shark Typhoon creates an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is that spell's mana value. As an option, we can cycle Shark Typhoon from our hand for X1 and a blue mana to draw a card and create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. Whirlwind of Thought simply draws us a card. Niv-Mizzet pairing cannot be countered, and whenever we draw a card, Nivi deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, we draw a card. Note that Nivi's card drawing ability triggers whenever any player casts an instant or sorcery spell, and not just us. Now let's showcase some cards that can deliver us victory over time or right on the spot. When Aria of Flame comes into play, each opponent gains 10 life. Once we overcome the challenge of reconciling in our mind that giving our opponents free life is okay, then we can focus on the deadliness of this enchantment. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we put a verse counter onto Aria of Flame, and then it deals damage equal to the number of verse counters on it to target player or planeswalker. It's only a matter of time before Aria of Flame has our opponents lose that free life, and a whole lot more. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Thousand Year Storm copies it for each other instant and sorcery spell we cast before it this turn. We may choose new targets for the copies. Note that the copies created by Thousand Year Storm's ability are created on the stack, so they are not cast. Also note that if the spell that's copied is modal, the copies will have the same modes. If the spell that's copied has an X whose value was determined as it was cast, then the copies will have the same value of X. If the spell that's copied divides damage or distributes counters, then the division of damage or distribution of counters cannot be changed. With the oodles of mana we can generate in this deck, Thousand Year Storm can win the game by chain casting a slew of instant and or sorcery spells. The same can be said for Arcane Bombardment, except that spellcasting chain creates a slower and more long-lasting burn. Whenever we cast our first instant or sorcery spell each turn, we exile an instant or sorcery card at random from our graveyard, then we copy each card exiled with Arcane Bombardment. We may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana costs. Note, unfortunately, that any spells with X in their casting cost must be 0 when we cast them this way. Imagine a scenario in which Arcane Bombardment exiles either Ruinous Ultimatum or Dune Blast. Our opponent's game plans become completely stagnant within the confines of this dynamic. Or what if Arcane Bombardment has exiled either Inspired Ultimatum or Unite the Coalition? Either way, our opponents can be in for a long, slow, and agonizing burn with Arcane Bombardment. Whenever we cast a spell, Aetherflux Reservoir has us gain 1 life for each spell we've cast this turn. We can pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to any target. As our life total piles up with this artifact, we get closer and closer to one-shotting an opponent. Let's see which opponents make with the nice in order to preserve their seats at the EDH table. For more straightforward game-winning options and with less hoops to jump through, we have Debt to the Deathless and Torment of Hailfire. Debt to the Deathless has each opponent lose twice X life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. Torment of Hailfire has each opponent repeat the following process X times. They lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. As we have showcased earlier in this video, we can generate a lot of mana in this deck, and all of it could be channeled into a game-ending Debt to the Deathless or Torment of Hailfire. Now it's time to close out this deck tech with a slew of cards that synergize with and enhance our spell-slinging theme. Mystical Tutor can find one of our instant or sorcery cards and puts it on top of our freshly shuffled library. Enlightened Tutor does the same, but instead of an instant or sorcery card, it finds one of our artifact or enchantment cards instead. Vampiric Tutor follows suit, and it has no restriction on the type of card we can find, but we do lose 2 life in the process. Demonic Tutor skips the top of the library restriction and puts any card from it directly into our hand. Speaking of putting cards directly into our hand, Rhystic Study taxes each opponent's spells by 1 generic mana. If they fail to pay it, then we draw a card. Even worse, our opponents get to hear us ask, "Are you going to pay 1 for that?" Over and over and over again. Lightning Greaves gives equipped creature haste and shroud. Its inclusion here is to protect Ramos from any spot removal spells or abilities from our opponents, as our general should be a lightning rod for retention. Speaking of lightning rods for retention, if the focus burns too bright on our general, then Omniscience can act as a reasonable Plan B to Ramos's Plan A. This enchantment allows us to cast spells from our hand without paying their mana costs. When Omniscience is paired with the Dalkin Orrery, which allows us to cast spells as though they had flash, then we should be nearly unstoppable. Hopefully, our opponents won't stop playing Magic with us afterwards. This Ramos Dragon Engine build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a Ramos Dragon Engine EDH deck video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below, on our YouTube page, or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. An EDH deck video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this Ramos Dragon Engine deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, a yo channel for all things Magic.